Betrayed and humiliated by the woman I loved, but I got up stronger and rebuilt my life. I always thought I knew exactly who I was and where I wanted to go. I grew up surrounded by engine parts, oil and tools. My father was a mechanic, and I learned early on to value honest work. Every screw tightened gave me a sense of accomplishment that no amount of money could buy. My life was simple but complete. I had my workshop, loyal friends, and of course, my wife, Sarah. At first, she seemed enchanted by my dedication, my simple and genuine way. But little by little, I began to notice a rift growing between us. Small things, glances and whispered comments, laughter she seemed to suppress when I entered the room. Deep down, I felt something wasn't right, but I insisted on believing that our love was strong enough to weather any hardship. My name is Marcio. I was 32 at the time, and I spent my days in the workshop I painstakingly built. Every brick, every wall, every tool represented years of struggle and pride. I've never been a man of luxury. I've always valued what I built with my own hands, but I never imagined that this simple life could be a source of shame for someone who claimed to love me, until everything began to change silently, without me noticing immediately. Routine became a fine line between affection and contempt. And it was precisely at that point that my life began to crumble, quietly, but with devastating force. The small suspicions became constant. Sarah began criticizing my clothes, my workshop, my way of speaking and acting. She seemed to see only limitations in me, never the effort I put into everything I did. At first, I tried to ignore them, thinking they were moments of stress or frustration in her life. But the atmosphere at home changed. Smiles became rare, hugs became mechanical, and conversations became tense. I felt my heart tighten, but I still tried to believe it was all temporary. Then the clearer signs began. Messages she received and hid. Phone calls she answered with downcast eyes and knowing smiles. A man named Mark appeared between us, and I still tried to convince myself they were coincidences or work friends. Each night I slept next to her became a silent martyrdom, an anguish I hid even from myself. I, who had always believed in the value of true love, began to doubt my own ability to be good enough. The insecurity, which until then had been minimal, began to erode my self-esteem. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to face the greatest challenge of my emotional life, and the battle wouldn't just be against Sarah and Mark, but against my own fears. The shock came when I discovered the audio recordings, recorded messages in which Sarah laughed at me, planned to get rid of her poor husband, and dreamed of a life of luxury with another man. It was as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. A mixture of anger, shame, and disbelief overcame me. I couldn't breathe properly, and the sight of the woman with whom I'd shared dreams, hopes, and plans crumbling before my eyes was almost unbearable. My mind raced, trying to understand where I'd failed, if there was anything I could have done to prevent it. But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't my effort, nor my dedication, nor the love I'd always offered. The problem was the deceit and ambition that silently grew within her. I, who had always valued ethics, truth, and respect, found myself trapped in an environment that humiliated me daily, where my dignity was being silently destroyed. It was at that moment that I realized I had to fight back, that I couldn't allow myself to be a victim. But the road ahead seemed long and full of uncertainty. Each step felt like a ton, and I feared I wouldn't be able to turn the tide. Still, I decided I couldn't wallow in my pain. I sought help. That's when I met Dr. Henrique, a fair, calm, and extremely intelligent lawyer. He guided me, gave me perspective, and made me see that there was a way to regain my dignity and prove the truth. We began gathering evidence, organizing messages, audio recordings, and everything that demonstrated Sarah's contempt and betrayal. It was an exhausting time, sleepless nights, anxiety, silent tears, and that constant weight on my chest. I felt fragile, but his presence gave me strength. It was as if, finally, I had someone by my side who believed in my worth and my story. And despite all the suffering, I began to realize something important. I still had control of my life. I could still decide how to face this humiliation and transform pain into action. The fight was just beginning, but for the first time, I felt there was a path, however tortuous, to overcoming it. As we prepared everything for the trial, I couldn't help but reflect on my life before this. Every moment of simple happiness now seemed like a precious thing I had never fully appreciated. Life with Sarah, though shrouded in genuine love at first, had become a series of small humiliations and silent heartbreaks. And at the same time, I realized that my skills, my ethics, and my strength of character were the only weapons I truly needed. Everything I had built with my hands and my heart would now serve as the foundation for my victory. I knew facing the trial wouldn't be easy, that the public exposure would be painful, but I also knew it was the only way to regain my dignity and show Sarah and myself that I was not a worthless man. Every thought, every memory, every challenge up to that point had prepared me for this decisive moment. The day I decided to confront Sarah was one of the most painful of my life. I was breathing deeply, my heart racing. Each step toward the room felt like an eternity. The words she'd said before, the contempt in her eyes, and the coldness in her tone hammered at my head like invisible blades. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness, but something deeper was at stake: my dignity. I needed to show that I wouldn't be passive in the face of someone who betrayed me, that my life, my work, and my honesty had value. She, with that scornful smile, seemed to disregard my decision, but I stood firm, even though my body trembled inside. The messages, the audio recordings, everything we'd gathered with Dr. Henrique weighed heavily as proof that I wasn't making anything up, that my intuition and suffering were legitimate. Every word she uttered, every look of disdain, was a silent provocation, but also a reminder that I was about to transform pain into concrete action. I was at my limit, but I was still breathing, still fighting, and still believing I could get out of this with my head held high. During the days leading up to the trial, anxiety consumed me. I spent hours reviewing every detail, every piece of evidence, every audio and message, trying to prepare myself for what was to come. But there were moments when fragility would overwhelm me again. I wondered if I could endure the public humiliation, if my heart could handle seeing Sarah smiling beside me, pretending nothing had happened, or if she would try to manipulate me further. The loneliness was overwhelming, even surrounded by Dr. Henrique and loyal friends. At night, I would sit alone in the workshop, staring at each tool, each wall built with sweat and dreams, and I wondered if it all still had value in the face of betrayal and contempt. There was a deep fear of not being good enough, of not being able to prove that my life, my story, and my efforts truly had meaning. But with each night of uncertainty, something within me grew, a silent determination, a strength that came not from bravery, but from necessity. I had to face the challenge, no matter what. When I finally entered the courtroom, the weight of my emotions nearly paralyzed me. Seeing Sarah sitting there, elegant, confident, trying to intimidate me with her gaze and posture was almost unbearable. But I took a deep breath and remembered every night I felt humiliated, every silent tear I shed alone. Dr. Henrique by my side was a support, but the battle was mine, and I knew it. Every word he said, every question he asked, was like a thread pulling the truth to the point where it could no longer be denied. Sarah tried to lie, manipulate, pretend nothing had happened, but the audios and messages were irrefutable. The ground that seemed to have opened up beneath my feet months before now became a firm foundation. Justice, represented by the judge, was about to be served. I felt my heart pounding, a mixture of anxiety and hope. Every second inside that room was a test of my emotional resilience, but also an opportunity to reconnect with my worth and dignity. There were moments during the trial when I thought I couldn't continue. The shame Sarah projected onto me seemed multiplied, and for a moment I felt like giving up, hiding from the world and running away from it all. But then I looked at Dr. Henrique and realized I wasn't alone, that my evidence was real, and that my story deserved to be heard. I took a deep breath and summoned all my strength to continue. Every word spoken, every emotion felt, was an internal battle against the fear and emotional fragility I'd carried for months. The process wasn't just legal, it was personal, an opportunity to prove to myself that I was worthy, that my life had value, that the man who had always believed in honest work and true love wouldn't be diminished by deceit or other people's ambition. The tension was almost unbearable, but I was determined to stand firm, not to give in to the despair that threatened to overwhelm me. When the audio recordings were finally released, I felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Relief because the truth was being revealed, and embarrassment because everything that had been private, everything that had humiliated me, was now public. But surprisingly, the predominant feeling was one of liberation. Sarah's mask fell before everyone, and the shame she had projected onto me returned, multiplied, directed at herself. I, who until then had felt fragile and insecure, was now standing tall, with dignity and strength. Every tear shed, every night of anxiety and fear, every moment I considered giving up, had been worth it. I was proving not just to Sarah or the court, but to myself, that a man's worth lies not in the luxury he possesses, but in the integrity, honesty, and emotional strength he can maintain even in the cruelest adversities. After the trial, the feeling of victory was undeniable, but peace was still a long way off. I had proven myself, but I still felt the echo of weeks of humiliation and betrayal running through my mind. The emotional scars didn't disappear overnight. Every time I looked at my workshop, I saw not only the sweat and effort I'd put in, but also the moments when I felt small, inadequate, betrayed. However, something had changed. Now I knew that my strength didn't depend on anyone's approval, that my dignity couldn't be stolen by the words or actions of others. I began to reorganize my routine, to dedicate myself even more to the work I loved. Each car repaired, each satisfied customer, was a reminder that my life had real, tangible value, and that no one could take that away from me. The sense of control over my own story, previously threatened, began to blossom, and with it, the hope of better days. Little by little, the emotional weight began to transform into creative energy, and I realized I was building not just cars, but my own emotional reconstruction. Relearning to trust myself was one of the hardest steps. For years, I'd based my self-esteem on being a good husband, a good professional, a good provider. And when Sarah cheated on me, it felt like all of that crumbled. But I realized that my worth was never tied to another person. I began to remember small victories from the past, when I built my workshop from scratch, when I helped friends or family without expecting anything in return, every gesture of honesty and dedication. This made me realize that my strength had always been within me, and that Sarah's betrayal didn't diminish who I was. I needed to internalize this truth. It was as if a new layer of courage was forming within me, a silent resistance that protected me from fear and insecurity. Every morning, as I opened the workshop, I felt this strength pushing me forward, reminding me that even when all seemed lost, I had the power to rise again. I also began to rebuild my social relationships. Friends who had distanced themselves for fear of hurting me returned, and I realized there were people who valued me for who I truly was. Long conversations, venting, laughter, short outings. All of this helped me rebuild my sense of belonging and security. It wasn't just a matter of being alone or with someone. It was understanding that my life needed genuine relationships, people who valued honesty and effort above status or appearance. This support network was fundamental to my emotional strengthening. Each conversation reminded me that I wasn't alone and that my pain, though intense, didn't have to define me. I still felt anger towards Sarah, still hurt, but I began to realize that holding a grudge would only hold me back. Forgiveness, or at least acceptance of the situation, became a powerful tool for inner freedom. At work, my dedication increased. Every car that arrived at the shop, every complex repair, every satisfied customer was a reminder that my skills and effort had real value. My self-esteem, previously shaken, began to slowly rebuild. I realized I didn't need recognition from Sarah or anyone trying to diminish my story. I could validate my own life. And at the same time, this dedication brought new opportunities. I began receiving referrals, small contracts with local companies, and I realized that my reputation as an honest and competent mechanic was spreading faster than I imagined. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but now it was fueling me to create a stronger, more resilient version of myself, a man who was learning to value himself above all adversity. Finally, I began to feel an inner transformation. The emotional fragility that had previously paralyzed me was now just a distant memory, a mark of what I had overcome. My relationship with myself was being restored, and I realized that my worth didn't depend on luxury, status, or the approval of others. Every challenge I faced, every silent tear, every night of anxiety, all converged to make me stronger, more centered, and more confident. I didn't have all the answers, nor all the certainties about life or love, but I knew I was capable of facing any adversity with dignity and determination. Overcoming adversity wasn't a moment. It was an ongoing process, and I was willing to live it fully, learning from each scar and transforming pain into real, tangible growth. As time passed, I realized that overcoming wasn't just about justice or the court. It was about my own ability to rise again. Each morning I woke up and went to the workshop was a reaffirmation of who I was, a man of integrity, hard work, and dignity. Sarah's public exposure in court made it clear to everyone that my life and my efforts had real value, but the deeper transformation took place within me. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. My achievements, however small, became a reflection of my effort, my ethics, and my courage. Each satisfied customer, each well done repair, each sincere compliment was a confirmation that my story would not be defined by someone else's betrayal. I began to feel my heart, once constricted by humiliation, now beat with renewed confidence and determination. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer paralyzed me. It was transforming into a learning experience, a silent force that drove me to live according to my values, not the expectations of others. My relationship with my own emotional body also began to re-establish itself. I felt the weight of the tears I'd shed for nights, but now they were reminders of resilience, not weakness. I learned to acknowledge my own emotions, not to be ashamed of the pain I felt, and, most importantly, not to let it define me. Every thought about Sarah and Mark was confronted with rationality and emotional clarity. I could feel anger, hurt, or sadness, but they didn't have to dominate my life. Dr. Henrique's presence and the support of my friends were crucial in this process. They not only reinforced my truth, but also helped me remember that my worth wasn't conditioned by anyone but myself. This awareness began to open new doors. Professional opportunities, healthy relationships, and the feeling that finally I could breathe and live without fear of being diminished. One of the most significant parts of this process was realizing that I had learned not to depend on other people's recognition to feel worthy. Before I sought validation from Sarah, and her contempt eroded my self-esteem. Today, my validation came from myself, from everything I had built and achieved with my hands and my ethics. The workshop which was once just a workplace, became a symbol of resilience and overcoming. Every client who came in not only needed my services, but also recognized, even if unconsciously, the effort, dedication, and honesty I put into each action. The sense of control over my own life, previously threatened, was now solid, and my heart began to open again to new possibilities, without haste and without fear. I was learning that true strength comes from within, and that no one can steal what is built with truth and effort. The past, of course, still haunted my mind. Moments of humiliation, Sarah's cruel laughter, Mark's contempt, all of it still existed in vivid memories. But now I could observe them without being consumed. Each painful memory became a learning tool, a reminder that life can be unfair, but also that it is possible to rise with dignity. I began writing my own story of overcoming, not only as a testament to justice, but as a narrative of emotional resilience and personal ethics. Each word I put on paper reinforced my self-confidence and reminded me that, even when all seemed lost, I had the ability to rebuild myself. The ultimate victory wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in my mind, in my heart, and in my ability to live with pride in who I truly am. Finally, I felt something profound had shifted, the pain of Sarah's. Betrayal and Mark's manipulation would no longer define me. I learned to value my own achievements, recognize my inner strength, and accept that not everyone deserves to occupy a place in our lives. What seemed like a painful end became a new beginning, a chance to live with authenticity, dignity, and courage. Every challenge I faced, every tear shed, and every night of uncertainty now served as the foundation of a stronger, more centered, and resilient man. I finally understood that true victory lies not in defeating others, but in overcoming one's own pain and becoming someone who respects oneself above all else. Life goes on, with challenges new and old, but now I have the tools and confidence to face them without fear of being diminished or devalued. In the following months, life began to take on a new, healthy rhythm. I still remembered everything I had been through, but now those memories were merely records of a battle won. The feeling of emotional freedom was indescribable. I could look at myself in the mirror and be proud of the man I had become. The workshop, my true home and symbol of effort, flourished like never before. Each customer who came in received more than mechanical services. They received dedication, honesty, and attention, something I learned to value even more. My routine, previously marked by anxiety and pain, became filled with purpose, gratitude, and focus. I felt lighter, more secure, and above all, whole. The emotional scars were still there, but they didn't define me. On the contrary, they reminded me of the strength it took to rebuild my life and reaffirm my dignity. Each small daily victory, each smile of recognition, was proof that I could live fully, even after the cruelest betrayal I had ever faced. My contact with Sarah and Mark gradually faded. There was no longer room for resentment or constant confrontation. I realized that keeping them in my life would be a waste of energy. My victory lay in moving forward, in strengthening myself, and in creating a life that didn't depend on their approval. This separation was liberating. I began to see that true justice isn't just legal or public, but also personal. It's the recognition of one's own worth, the ability to remain whole even when everyone tries to diminish you. With each day, my confidence grew, my self-esteem strengthened, and my sense of dignity strengthened. I learned that overcoming doesn't mean forgetting the pain, but rather integrating it as part of the journey of growth, transforming suffering into fuel for life itself. Emotionally, my transformation was profound. I began to trust my decisions more, to value my achievements, and to understand that I don't need anyone to validate me. The fear of not being good enough that haunted me for years was replaced by a firm sense of self-affirmation. I understood that my value lies not in the luxuries I can achieve, nor in the approval of a partner, but in my ethics, dedication, courage, and the way I face adversity. This learning changed the way I view relationships, work, and life. I began to prioritize people and experiences that add value, that inspire, and that respect my efforts. Every gesture of honesty, every sincere word became even more precious and meaningful. Overcoming obstacles is no longer just a goal, it has become my way of life. Today, I share my story with pride and gratitude. I don't hide the pain I felt, nor the tears I shed, but I also don't shy away from showing my strength. I learned that it's possible to rebuild your life, even when everything seems lost, that personal dignity is non-negotiable, and that overcoming adversity is a daily achievement, built with effort, patience, and courage. Each day lived with integrity, each challenge faced with self-belief is a silent but powerful victory. I've become someone capable of rising up, even when it seemed impossible, and of finding light where before there were only shadows of despair. The pain hasn't completely disappeared, but it no longer defines me. It only reinforces how capable I am of remaining strong and whole. In the end, I learned that life isn't about avoiding pain, but about learning to walk with it, transforming suffering into growth, and building a version of yourself that doesn't depend on anyone but yourself. The court, the audio recordings, the public exposure, all of this was just part of a larger process, but the true victory was in my mind and heart. Today, I can look back and recognize that what seemed like an absolute disaster became the greatest opportunity for self-discovery and empowerment I've ever had. Every challenge I faced taught me that even when someone tries to diminish us, our dignity, effort, and ethics remain inviolable. I am Marcio, a mechanic, a hard worker, a man of integrity, and this experience showed me that it is possible to rise up, live with pride, and never give up on yourself.